would start, and more folks will join in as they come along. So welcome to calling Talking Hobies. Since this design is really a first of a series of webinars about Hobie Cat sailing and sailboats and just and everything related to Hobie Cat sailing. Our intention here is to really vary the topics and engage Hobie enthusiasts throughout the community. We have ideas in later episodes to engage folks from the Hobie Cat factory, sort of family sailors, competitive sailors, really a broad spectrum of topics. And frankly, we welcome your ideas for future episodes. My name is Rich McVeigh, and I'm the president of the International Hobie Class Association. This webinar series is sponsored by the International Hobie Class. Just a quick segment about who we are. We're really a group of sailors and volunteers to organize Hobie sailing events worldwide. Since the COVID-19 pandemic has arrived, it's really left a lot of us with a lot of time on our hands, and many of our usual events have been canceled. And we've noticed through social media that there's been enormous activity related to, fixing up of boats, repairing of boats. And we thought this was a great opportunity for us to jump in and share some of our knowledge and help others interested in Hobie Cat sailing. So for those of you that are members of the Hobie Class Association, we thank you for your support. If you are not a member, we sincerely encourage you to consider joining the class. The class is full of sailors just like yourself that are interested in Hobie Cat sailing. And frankly, we can't do these things without your support. So you can learn more about the Hobie Class Association on our website at hobieclass.com. All right, so just a quick little bit of business here. So this is what we're doing tonight. It's called Zoom Webinar, and it's a little bit different than Zoom Meeting that many of you have probably already been using. In Zoom Webinar, the only people you'll see are the presenters on your screen. However, if you look around on your screen, you will see a couple buttons, and one of them is called a Q&A button, and one is a chat button. And we encourage you to launch those now and move those to the side, and that is how we interact with you. You will ask your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to respond to those on the screen. Tonight's episode is being recorded. Let's just start to pause this. We did that. And we will make it available afterwards for those that weren't able to participate live. All right, so our first webinar series is all about fiberglass repairs. And our guest speaker here is Mark Modermans. Hi, Mark.
How you doing?
Mark, as a way of intro, Mark is not only one of the really top Hobie Cat sailors in the United States, he's a professional in fiberglass repair and has many, many years of experience, as you're going to hear. And we thought it would be great first topic for our series. So, Mark, introduce yourself. Say a few words about your background and Hobie Cat sailing and how you got to be what you're doing as a profession.
Well, thank you very much, Rich and Carol, for inviting me to this webinar. It's pretty exciting to be involved in this, I must say. With the virus and everything and not being involved with our local community, it's nice to kind of reach out and hopefully we see some guys and get some questions from some of our buddies there. But I've been a Hobie enthusiast for a long time. I started surfing as a really young boy, probably 10 or 11, and started repairing surfboards in order to acquire my wetsuits and surfboards. And that led us into, we grew up in Port Elizabeth, and there was a very active Hobie community there. And driving by the beach one day, my dad said, "Look at those pretty sails," and that was the start of a lifestyle. I started sailing Hobies when I was about 13 and started repairing them at that point. At that stage, we didn't have beach wheels, so we'd be dragging our boats up the beach. So people constantly needed their bottoms redone. And that was a good source of revenue for me as a little boy. And also the obsession with sailing the Hobies. I mean, it's, I just loved it. I mean, it was, that's all I wanted to do, I remember getting the Welcome to A Fleet and learning every single name for each position on the Hobie Cat, and that was my start. And I was very fortunate at 16 to race with one of the top sailors in the world, and we went to the Worlds in Tahiti in I believe that was '82, and that was the start of my obsession for the racing and that whole Hobie lifestyle and the people that we meet, that the Hobie way of life, as I say, and it's an amazing fellowship. And so with that, you know, I got into, I guess after school, I started doing fiberglass repair professionally, and I've been doing it ever since. I wouldn't maybe advise that for anybody, but it's the way things happened. And so I have a lot of experience. It was something, and fiberglass is something that's not, there isn't courses. I know there are courses now, but in those days there really wasn't. So it was very much a trial and error kind of thing. And you know, the discussion was to try and keep it relatively basic, but try and impart some tricks of the trade, if you will, and an easy way to process through a repair. It, you know, as we've seen, it can be an intimidating thing, especially when you're unaware of how some of the products work and where to even start. So that was the thought, that we could come to you and give you an idea of how to start a process like this. And you know, it's not that difficult if you get a little bit of guidance, and there are some easy little ways to go through it, and it's not as intimidating as it may seem. So I think that kind of covers a lot of it, Rich. If we want to go into the procedures, we can do that.
Yeah, excellent. That's a great intro, Mark. So, all right, so let's move on. We've selected a couple of projects here for our first episode, and we quickly realized we had quite a bit of content. So we're gonna see how this goes. Our intention is to go about an hour, and we're kind of anticipating that some of this will get maybe picked up in episode number 2, and particularly things like gel coat and finishing. But we started out with an easier project, which was really a ding repair, something really everybody faces. So Mark prepared some video, and I'm going to share that with you now, and we'll stop a couple times along the way and talk about different segments of it. Get the screen share to work.
Glass started fixing surfboards, and as a little boy, and got into fixing Hobie Cats once I started sailing the Hobie Cats when I was about 13. So I wanted to do a little tutorial about fixing a little gel coat repair. I work in the marine industry, and so some little tips and tricks along the way just to make a simple repair a little easier. Some little things I've learned along the way. Okay, let's get started. Okay, we've got a little gel coat chip on the bow of the boat here, as you can see. I do put on gloves just to keep my hands a little cleaner, and also the first step with this is to wipe the area down thoroughly with some acetone. Remove all the wax contaminants, and this was taped up, so any of the tape residue. So I thoroughly clean the whole area before I sand it all. So I'm not sanding any of the wax or grease or whatever contaminants into the repair. Okay. Okay, I found over the years a little right angle drill works really well with the 3M little disc and the 3-inch little grinding discs. The grinding discs can range from 50 grit to 36, which are probably the most common ones that I'll use. So I'll often go with a 36 grit disc. I find this, it's a little slow perhaps on the RPM, but I got a lot of control, and for the extra little time that it takes to grind it out, I find this a really, really good little tool. And it's not too fast, so you can control it nice and easily. There's the little grind. So I'm going to grind this out here and show you what I do. It's controlled to a vacuum. I like using a vacuum so I don't get fiberglass stuffed all over me. But you can see how in the repairs, some of it will be a little white. You want to get rid of all the fractured fiberglass in the repair, as well as the rough edge of the gel coat. So I'll start grinding the edge here. Yeah, and what you'll see on the edge here, there's like a sharp little edge, and it's not kind of even right over there. So I'll grind this back a little further. I'm looking for that kind of finish over there, where it's like it's ground in evenly to the fiberglass, and there's no fracturing or sharp edges. I'm gonna go a little bit more. As I'm going along, you can see there's kind of shiny spots, and you can see over here there's still a little bit of the gel coat. I mean, the fiberglass is still a little fractured. So although it's really aggressive, you really want to get coat or body filler on top of this. Where it's fractured like that is eventually over time just going to release again. So you really want to get back to the fresh stuff. You want to try and avoid going right through the boat. On the sharp edge here, there's quite a bit of material, so the risk of going through is limited. But if you get anywhere going through the boat, you want to slow down and stop right there. Okay, once we ground it out, we'll give it another, just a wipe clean with acetone. You don't need to go crazy, just to get rid of the dust. Okay, and then let the acetone evaporate off that. And then we're going to mask it up. When we mask it up, we actually stay about a 1/16 of an inch off where we've ground. We don't want to mask into the repair, because then when we fill it and sand it, we're going to have masking tape inside. So I usually stay about a 1/16 of an inch outside of where I've ground. Okay. And the tape acts as like kind of a guide when you grind it too. So we'll put the filler in here, and then we'll grind it fair with the masking tape. So we'll mask it all the way around. Okay, that's good. Okay.
We're back for a couple of questions there, Rich?
Yeah,
or?
we're back. As soon as I get back to the right screen, we're back.
Okay. So
Get out of here. Okay, yeah, so let's stop there and see if there's any questions, and also just chat about that a little bit. So, you know, a couple things I'm struck with, you know, looking at your video there, and I think that probably a lot of people would be surprised with is, you know, for such a small, what appeared to be such a small repair, you approach that. I mean, think about how you approach that, but also really just the amount of material you have to remove.
Yep.
get back to really solid. So why don't you comment on that a little bit, if you would?
Absolutely, and that's a common thing. You know, we always have a joke in a fiberglass game. You know, you love it when the owner's standing looking over you, and you take your grinder to his beautiful boat and start going at it. But the key behind that is that if you're leaving any fractured fiberglass or any delaminated fiberglass or any gel coat that's starting to chip off on the edges, if you put filler over that, it's in short period that's going to release again. So the whole idea, as aggressive as it may seem, and it is a pretty aggressive at times, you really need to cut into fresh material. And if you do go into the fresh material, your repair will last pretty much forever. It'll be as solid as the boat. If you don't, you're going to run the risk of it delaminating again.
Okay,
Can
excellent.
Mark see the question?
Yeah, so there we just had a question come in about the grit you typically use. I think you commented was 36 grit you like to use for that type of, to grind it back, correct?
Yeah. So, and those are little roll-up discs. They go on a little 3-inch grinder. And generally, I've actually used it on fairly bigger repairs too, just because I got a lot more control. When you go to a 5-inch disc and at 3,000 RPM, you're creating a whole lot of dust, and it becomes a lot more unpleasant environment to work in. Plus, you haven't got as much control. And certainly with a Hobie Cat, you don't have a very thick laminate there. So 36 is definitely an aggressive grit, but you want to grind away pretty aggressively. I mean, the next grit down would be probably 50, you know, and, you know, for your first, if you're putting fiberglass down or you're putting filler down, you basically want some teeth in the job in order for your filler or fiberglass to hold on to. So the coarser your grit, the better the filler or the fiberglass or the resin is going to hold to. So, you know, as long as you're cautious with it, the coarse grit is good.
Excellent. So I know we're going to get into this next here in the video, but maybe just expand a little bit more as you think about the repair. What really materials are next to you know, you've exposed the damage now, you've ground it away, and what's really the appropriate materials to start rebuilding this with? And then what about things like, you know, you would see very commonly on social media for a ding like that, someone would say, oh, just slather some marine tex on it and call it done. So maybe just comment on that a little bit with our group tonight.
Yeah, very much so. Okay, so, you know, once you start grinding it, and a lot of times you'll see like a little stress crack or something, you'll be like, oh, that's not too bad. I can put some, and we'll talk about the materials too at the end, yeah, the marine tex, or I'll talk about that in a sec, but sometimes you'll see a little stress crack and you'll be like, oh, that's not so bad. And the real key is once you start grinding at it, and it starts opening up. Once you start to remove the finished gel coat, and gel coat is just a cosmetic finish. There's no structural integrity in that white finish or whatever your color boat is. The gel coat is just a cosmetic finish, and you can wet sand and buff it and polish it and that. So you can work the gel coat pretty well. But the real key is the fiberglass behind it. So once you start grinding away, you take your 36 grit, or if you want to go with your 50, you can. It's just going to be a little more time consuming, you know, to grind it away. But once you get into your fiberglass, and that's going to be the key, to see how delaminated your fiberglass is. And the key to once you start getting into the glass is it should be like a reddish or brownish color. If there's any kind of white in that finish, that means that fiberglass is delaminating or fractured. And when it takes an impact hit, that can be pretty extensive. Like it may look like a little chip, and then once you take that gel coat off, you know, you're going to see like white stuff in the fiberglass laminate that needs to get ground out. So, and you shouldn't be shy about grinding it out and going the extent of that delamination, because once you start filling and repairing, that's all going to come back again. So your initial grind looks horrible, and it's like, you know, and it's you're really going at the boat and taking it apart, but you're going to build it all up again. So you're going to go through the process of building it up again. So as far as going to the filler, now you've ground it out and you've cleaned the dust off. You've given it a light acetone wipe. You don't want to rub it with the acetone, because then you kind of melt the edges of the glass back down again. So a light acetone wipe, and you don't want to leave. I use Bounty paper towels. That's just a habit that I've got into. I stay away from rags, because you don't know where they've been, and a lot of times rags will go through a wash and you will get some Stay Soft or whatever on it. So for me, I'm a Bounty guy. I go through rolls of paper towels, and when you wipe it, you've got to watch out that you don't leave bits of the paper towel behind. So a light wipe on that rough grind. Then you decide, okay, if you've gone expensive and you're starting to see on a Hobie Cat, if you're going down to the core and you're starting to see there's a very thin layer of core in the Hobie hull, if you're starting to see the core, that's an indication that you may want to lay a little bit of fiberglass in there. Okay. If you don't see if it's a definite chip like we have on the bow on the sharp area, you can just use a filler. Okay, there's lots of fillers on the market, and you know, you could put anything in there, but the products that I like the most are the 3M vinyl ester filler, which is it's a vinyl ester reinforced putty. It's super strong. Vinyl ester is a little bit of a stronger resin. Okay, so it's pretty strong. So if you have a nice, well, let's call it a deep chip on the nose to the boat, like we did there, I'll use that vinyl ester reinforced putty. For a really small little chip, if you are going to gel coat it, I like the Evercoat Formula 27, only because it dries really nicely, and when you go to sand it out, it doesn't clog up your pad. The marine text, like you were saying, Rich, is a very common thing. That is an epoxy product. It's intended more for gouges and scratches. The one issue, I guess, in more of a professional light is that the color is usually off. It's very difficult to match the color. And it's a dissimilar material. Epoxies are incredible resins. They're incredible. They've got a very good bonding capabilities. The disadvantage is it's an overnight cure. It's a 16-hour dry time. So if you are doing a filling process, you're going to have to fill it once and then come back the next morning and sand it out. And what usually happens, if you don't quite put enough additives in it to thicken it up, it usually sags a little bit, so you need to do a second fill. My thought process on that is I try and stay with the material that the boat is built in. So our Hobie Cats are polyester resin for the hulls. So a polyester resin is sufficient for any kind of fill or laminate. The vinyl ester is a step up from polyester. It's kind of between polyester and epoxy, so it's a little bit of a stronger putty, and it dries pretty quick, so you can fair it and go to the gel coat stage. And in this repair process, we're talking about gel coating. So and we can get that. I know there's a lot of content here, and I'm very interested to hear what people say, what kind of angle they want to go. I mean, we could talk all night on this. So, and we talked about maybe doing a separate thing on gel coats. But just to touch on that, I generally like to spray the gel coat, and you can thicken up gel coat if you've got small little chips with some Armospheres or Cabasol. It's like a powder intended for thickening resins and gel coats. And you can thicken up a paste and use that. That's what I would use before I used anything else. So hopefully that covers a little bit of that, Rich?
Yep. All right, so perfect. So let's go back to the video. Before we do that, we had one question here from Steve H. I know is joining from the United Kingdom. So welcome, Steve.
Welcome, Steve.
His question was, as you're grinding, Mark, are you just using the edge of the rotary disc or using the whole disc?
Okay, well, that depends on what the surface is. And looking at your FX there, I would probably use like 30% of the disc. I wouldn't go up onto the edge because that's obviously going to cut into it. So I'd probably use 30 to 40% of the disc. If you go flat, the disc tends to jump in that, and you got some pretty coarse paper there. So I would kind of do it in like I guess you could call like a gouging motion with 40% of that disc, and just go at it. Take a little bit out, take a little bit out, you know, and kind of do it in stages, and so that you can get a visual, you know, as opposed to going right at it with a flat disc. So I would just use that edge and just kind of grind it out, you know. And with that crack, it looks like you're going to start seeing some of the core fairly soon. So you want to go at the crack, and then you want to go outside of the crack until you get solid fiberglass. Using in the fiberglass, the bevel, if you will, the scarf rate is, they say, a 7-to-1 ratio on your scarf rate, your angle off, and you can adjust that as you please. If you're just filling it with putty, you can have a pretty steep angle of grind. But if you're laying some glass in there, which that crack may end up needing, you know, they may be a little deeper than you think, you may want to change your angle of grind so that you get a larger surface for your fiberglass to lay against, and in that getting a better bond. Hopefully that answers your question there.
Excellent. So Steve, just for everyone else, Steve sent us a photo earlier of a repair he had pending on his boat, so we were able to offer him some more specific advice. So, all right, so I'm going to jump back to the video now.
Okay, we're going to mix the filler here. On a general Hobie repair, a lot of people talk about using epoxies. Epoxies are an amazing product and bond extremely well. The disadvantage is they have an overnight dry time, so a 16-hour cure time. And your repair will be strong. What I like to do on the whatever boat I'm working on, or the Hobies, it's a polyester resin laminate on there. So I really like to stay with the polyester product. Okay, I do like the vinyl ester reinforced putty. It's very, very strong. So on an edge like that, it would work really well. The Formula 27 Evercoat is a nice finish filler, or for smaller little dings and repairs. Those are the two products I like to use. They don't clog up the paper. They stand out pretty well, and they're both water resistant. Okay, I'm gonna fill that one with a little bit of the vinyl ester reinforced putty. So I like to use a little piece of cardboard. Works well. I mean, a lot of people say you shouldn't because it's a little porous, but it works well for me. And the amount of stuff that I do, I go through a lot of cardboard, little pallets. So I get a little product. Usually the size of the blob is probably the length of the catalyst. Okay, so I'll mix that all in. Make sure that it's mixed thoroughly. I generally don't like using the blue cream hardener, just because of the pigments in it. Sometimes if you're doing a white Gelcoat and you start getting really thin when you sand it out, it'll start bleeding through. So that's why I like using a white cream hardener. Okay, we got it mixed up. We'll fill now. Okay. So when filling, A lot of people like to put as much as they can on and want to try to do it in one application. That's not always possible. And, you know, much like spackling a wall, it's better to do maybe 2 or 3 coats than try and put it on one full one. I like to try and get it in one. And if you can, it's good. As long as you get a solid full, and so we'll go side to side. The trick to this is to actually put it on either side and even let it bubble out a little bit. If you go down the middle, it's going to pull all the product out of it, you know? So that's what we're going to do there. Okay, so we got that fold. I did tape it a little, and I put another piece of tape on here. You want to try and avoid, when you do fold, getting the filler onto your finished product. So be aware of that. It's just another step that you're going to have to clean up. So try and keep it wide, you know, keep it clean, keeps less clean up afterwards. So there we got it full. We'll let that harden, and we'll continue once that's hardened, standing out.
Sorry, I did repeat myself a little bit there, so.
That's okay. All right, so that's our video for tonight. All right, so yes, I think that gave us a nice demonstration of sort of the initial stage of the repair there. And so maybe talk about what's next with that, Mark.
Yeah, so I actually hoped to get all that video done, and we kind of ran out of time a little bit there. But the next stage is to grind that down. So to grind it fair. So doing that, and that's why I'd mentioned in one of the videos there that the tape can actually act as a guide. So I would go back to my 36 grit, and I would carefully grind that filler down, okay, using the tape as a guide. Okay, the key to that is to go on the flat surfaces. Once again, much like I mentioned when filling it, don't go and sand the round or the curve first. You want to do the flat surfaces first, and at the very last, you shape your edge. So a lot of people will sand, and then they'll go at the edge, and then you'll get a big divot. You'll actually lose your fare. So do the flat areas first, and I would probably use my 36, go down, and, you know, concentrating on the edge of the repair mainly until I just start seeing the tape showing. At that point, I would slow down and maybe go to a sanding block. I'd probably go down to 80 grit and then use the 80 grit block to sand the rest of the edges. Okay, once I got that, then I would pull the tape off, and you would have a very thin lip, if you will, there. Okay. I may even take a piece of tape and put it a 16th off that edge, and then go at it with the 80 again to try and get that edge fair to the hull. Once I've got that fair, then I would do my edge, the sharp edge of that repair. So I would get the 2 sides done, and then the very last thing, I would do my shape so that the sides would be perfect, and then I would get the shape of the hull. Okay.
Yeah, so Mark, what sort of grit in terms of sanding would you go up to prior to moving on to gel coat?
Okay, so if there's any imperfections in that repair, once you've like sanded now with your 80 grit with the block, you know, I mean, you can go to a soft block, even works well to do the contour. Once you've got it to the shape that you like, if there's any kind of air, air voids or little imperfections in that, that's when I would take my Formula 27, mask it off again, and give it a very tight screed, a very tight wipe with the Formula 27, and then go back to the 80 grit and use that to sand that off, so that all my little holes and all my little perfections, I try and get my fairing and filling stage perfect. Okay, once I've got it perfect, then I end up taping, and this is something we can go into a little further, but I would probably go as much as 4 to 5 inches outside of my repair, okay, and mask that area off. Okay, then I would take 220, which is the grit that I would suggest for prior to application of gel coat. In order for the gel coat to bond properly, I would go to 220. Okay, so I would go down to my 220, and I would end up concentrating on my repair first, making sure that's nice and smooth, and then I would scuff that entire area out with the 220. And the reason we do that is that it allows, when you spray your gel coat onto your repair, it allows the overspray to carry on to, and this is a big mistake people make, is they take too close to the repair and then spray your gel coat, and you end up having a serious edge. You know, the gel coat will spray and go all over the tape. So when you go to sand it out, you're sanding all this gel coat out to get to the tape. So you actually want to go a little further than you really want to outside of your repair, so that when you spray your repair, the overspray kind of dusts to the tape. You don't want a solid gel coat line on your tape. Okay, and that makes a super easy sand out once you sand it, and you limit your risk of sanding through your existing gel coat finish, you know. And we can go into a little bit of that. I mean, a lot of that is easier to show while you're doing the process, you know. But so I go to 220. Okay, if you want to go a little further than that, once the gel coat cures, and there's a couple of methods there. We talked about matching gel coats. There's a mustard pigment that you can, if your boat has aged a lot, just a dab of that is usually gets it to the color of an aged gel coat. The risk with pigments, and I try, and obviously I've got the opportunity with multiple gel coat colors to blend and match, but the problem with pigments is that it's a very strong color, so you need the minutest of pigment to change the color, and it's very difficult when working with pigment to get the desired color that you want. So as far as gel coats go, I mean, your local marina usually has a stash of gel coats. I'm always open to helping people out that come in, because I know the challenges of going to a marine store or online and finding the gel coats that you need. Hobie Cat do have gel coats, and sometimes you get lucky and the colors are good. Unfortunately, some of the hulls are made overseas with the newer boats, and obviously there's a lot of older boats, so those gel coats are not going to be available anymore, you know. But if you go to your local boatyard or your local fiberglass guy, and he's more than likely going to help you out and try and get a gel coat color that would work for you. You know, once your gel coats have cured, there's additives that you can put in your gel coat to help it blend in. And we can talk a little bit about that. And I try and stay away from styrene. I actually use Patch Aid. I find that a very good product to thin the gel coat a little bit when you're trying to spray it. A lot of people, I'm sure a question will come up about brushing it, you know, because a little bit of procedure getting the right gun or compressed air. Brushing is very difficult, and we've tried multiple methods, you know, growing up, putting wax paper over it to try and get a smooth finish, you know, once you've brushed it on. But the disadvantage about brushing is that it leaves too big a grooves in it. And even though you try and put it on thick, by the time you end up wet sanding and sanding that out, you end up burning through. You know, you're welcome to try it, but that's usually been my experience. So once I've sprayed the gel coat, even with Patch Aid, which they say you don't really need to surface, because just as a matter of interest, gel coat does not dry. The surface never dries exposed to oxygen. So the idea of gel coat, unless it has wax added to it, and the problem with wax additive is that it gums up your paper. So if you're looking to wet sand it out, I would not suggest wax in your gel coat. Okay. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I was going with the patch aid. Okay, the patch aid allows the gel coat to dry. So I still have a habit of putting PVA over the surface. PVA is a polyvinyl acetate, which is a water-based product that will help cure the gel coat, and it also acts as a sanding guide, you know, when you go to wet sand it out. So that's going through the whole process there. So hopefully I didn't go off on a tangent. You got me started there, Richie.
All right, good. All good. So
It's dirty look.
I think what we'll try to do is do a second episode where we have some video where we can demonstrate some of the gel coat and the finishing techniques. But one thing I find, and maybe to comment on Mark, so I do a little bit of repairs myself, and one sort of frustrating thing for people that are just doing occasional use is you buy a product and like gel coat, and you do a little bit, and you've got a lot of it left, and then it sits on your shelf for a little while, and then you go to use it a second time, and it's gone bad. A lot of these products seem like they have a really short shelf life.
Yes, unfortunately they do. And in fact, the patch aid material that we get it's probably a 3-month shelf life is what they're saying. It does last a little longer, but that's what they sell it for. Gel coats you can keep in a refrigerator. You do not want to freeze them, but in a refrigerator will help keep their life. Unfortunately, they do have a shelf life and they do go bad. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So just do you have gel coat in your refrigerator? Because I don't think Carol would be too happy with me if I had in my refrigerator. Just
no, I don't actually. I guess I'm fortunate that if I have enough gel coat in stock that I will just go get some new gel coat. Yeah.
All right, so we have a question here, a couple questions. So we have a question from Dr. James here, and asking about the sequence of sandpaper grits you would typically go through in finishing before you got to rubbing compound, and then a follow-up on that, really getting to that glossy, high gloss finish, end result.
Okay, hey, that's a good question. How you doing, Herb? Hope you guys are well. Hey, hopefully we get to race against you soon. Hey, so the finishing technique, there's a lot of that is technique as opposed to material. Okay, there's a lot of good materials, good compounds out there. So my procedure, once I've got my gel coat and it's cured, I go straight to 320 and I lightly sand that surface out. Any kind of orange peel or imperfections in my finish, I'll use the 320 to get rid of. I probably won't go all the way and get all the imperfections out because there's a risk of burning through when you end up spraying that gel coat on. The material thickness is thin. So once I've got it down and I've got most of the imperfections out with the 320, I'll jump straight to 800 wet. And I'll go 800, 1000, 1200. Okay, thoroughly sanding those areas. The 800, by this point, I would have already started pulling my tape. So I would go 320 to the point on the edge of the tape where I'm right there, and maybe even pull my tape. And then there'll be a little edge there. Then I would go 800, and I would use my 800 to remove that edge so that I'm not sanding too much into the existing finish of the boat. Then once I've got my 800 and it's looking really good, I keep a paper towel with me, get the residue off, keep it nice and wet. Once I've got all my little imperfections out with the 800 and I'm almost perfect, then I would go to my 1000 and 1200 just as a procedure to get rid of the scratches. So get rid of the 800 scratches, get rid of the 1000 scratches. I'm down to 1200. I go with the 3M make a heavy gel coat compound, and that's what I would use then to buff that out. That compound, they say, will remove up to 800 scratches. But I've now gone down to my 1200, so I'm pretty sure that that compound will take those 1200 scratches out efficiently. The key to compounding and buffing and polishing is technique. So 3M have a procedure on how to buff, and it's basically a cross pattern. So you want to be really methodical, up and down, like 50% of your overlap, 50% overlap, and go up and down, and then go 90 degrees to that. Goes horizontally across that pattern, same, 50%, 50%, so that you thoroughly, like really methodically buff that out, okay? And then you can go at a 45 and then change to the other 45 and do that procedure. In that way, you will be assured that you compounded the whole area out. The same thing when you do your hull. You wax it, or you use a mild compound to wax it out. It's all about the technique. The technique is key, and allowing the material to work for you. So don't like use it super fast, you know, and lots of pressure. That's not necessary. Okay, your initial thing, slow motion. Your first compound motion, really slow, and kind of work it in that pattern. Work it. And then as the compound starts getting less and less, you can kind of speed it up a little bit, but continue working in that motion. Okay, until basically all the compound is gone. Oh, looks like I'm getting low on my battery. Yeah. And once the compound's gone, then I would take a cloth, wipe it off, and then look at it at an angle in the light and see if there's any hazing or whatever. Put a little more compound. I usually take a brush and I'll brush the compound onto the surface, and then I'll work it with my compound pad. And I usually use a 3M white pad, compounding pad. Okay, the next step down is like they call it, it's a gold pad. If you really wanted to buff it super shiny, you could go to a polish, okay? And then all wax is just a sealant and a protectant. So wax is your final coat, and you can buff that on, or you could just wipe it on and then buff it on, wax off kind of procedure. So that's kind of the method going through there. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, that'd be a nice subject for an additional video, I think. All right. We've still got a few minutes. You want to chat about the rudder repair quickly, or?
Which repair is that?
The rudder repair you sent me?
Sure.
All right, so let's switch gears here. Let me switch gears here while he's getting his thing plugged in. And I probably have to start the show. And let's go to here. All right, that's not working.
All right.
All right, hope everybody can see that. So, so this is our sort of second project we picked here was a rudder repair as a demonstration. We'll just chat about this for a few minutes here. So one comment before I guess I'll turn over to Mark here on rudders. Rudders are a little bit tricky because there's so many different rudders that have been used over the years on Hobie Cat boats, and they're not all made of the same materials. So a first step would be to really know what kind of rudder you're talking about and what it's made from, so decide on the materials. So Mark, this one appears to be a fiberglass rudder called the race rudder. Is that correct?
Yes. So yeah, you can see we got multiple repairs on that, and they get fractured pretty easily. You know, one good hit on them and they will delaminate. So the whole key is to get your scarf rate once again, you know, and grind back. As you can see, there may have been a little chip, and I've gone into the rudder a fair amount. And what I would do in this situation is if it's a, how can I explain this? If it's really thick after the grind, you can fill that, or if it's cracked, you can fill it with the filler and then grind it out again. But what I would always do with these is I would laminate a little bit of mat and resin on either side of the repair. In that way, I was assured that it would be strong. You can see the edges of that, the end of that rudder got worn away completely. And then in the right side of the photo, you can see I've got a little bit of mat and resin in that repair. And what I've done there is I've actually done it in 2 stages. I put the tape underneath the repair, and then, you know, fiberglass the top edge. And then I would take my grinder and I would clean that fiberglass repair up, and then I would flip the rudder over and do the same thing on the other side. In that way, I've got like 2 layers of glass either side, and I'm assured that's not going to delaminate or let go. And the reason I grind so far back into the repair is so that that fiberglass mat bonds really well to the existing rudder. Does that make sense?
Indeed.
Yeah, there's a good example there. I've got it fiberglass, you know, and you can see the grind out and the laminate, laying the fiberglass in there.
Right, and
so that's once I've ground it, and then I would probably use my Formula 27 and give it a smear with the formula and sand it out with probably 80 grit, and then I would go to my 220. And you can see in the left photograph, the tape is way far back from the original repair. And you can see in that left photo, the right rudder, the one that's standing vertically, you can see where the tape is. I mean, it's probably 3 inches back from the edge. So in that way, I can shoot the edge, and then the overspray will go up onto the tape. And the key to that is using that 220 and scuffing out that whole area below the masking tape. Otherwise, you're going to get a shiny edge that you're never going to get rid of, trying to feather it in. You know, if you scuffed it out with the 220, then that overspray of the gel coat will blend right in, and you can just wet sand that out to a nice finish. And you can see on the right side, that's the heavy duty compound, and I've probably waxed that as well, those rudders. So they look pretty good. They look ready to race. Mm-hmm. Now you have your EPO3s, okay, which are the more common rudders now, and they're epoxy rudders. So you could follow the same procedure. Now, and, you know, obviously there's a dry time then, you know, but you could use, you can't use matte with epoxy. It needs to be epicized. The glue in the matte won't allow the epoxy to saturate it. So you need to use a woven cloth. So the materials are a little different, but same kind of procedure. Okay.
Yeah. So speaking of the EPO rudder, is the, you know, sort of the current rudders on the Hobie 16. So the EPO 2 in particular, it seemed like it had like a real clear coat finish on that. Have you ever had any success working with those and restoring that really clear coat finish?
Yeah, they're tricky. I mean, I have laminated or clear coated a lot of those with epoxy. The epoxies are tough to get a nice coat without going ahead and spending hours and hours trying to finish it. You're almost better off taking a polyurethane clear coat and clear them. You know, that would be a spray job, and it's not quite as strong as epoxy, but the finish is unbelievable, and you can spray it and walk away, you know. So there's actually some of the, on a lot of the sport fishermen's, their fighting chairs are actually a teak chair, and the procedure they use there is they epoxy or cold mold for matter of fact, epoxy that wood, and then they're putting an automotive clear coat, actually a polyurethane. It's more marine, so it's the all grip products. Hopefully we can use the product names on this. So we're using All Craft, which is actually an acrylic urethane, but you can use the polyurethane clear coat to finish those as well. So you could use that same procedure on those EPO2s, and those black rudders. Yep.
Okay. Couple of questions come in, so let me hit these one at a time, a little bit different. So first one here is sort of related to a chip. So how big of a chip would you repair with, say, a Gelcoat and filler, or a filler, as sort of a Gelcoat putty versus doing to a filler, or having to put in fiberglass underneath?
That's a good question, and I was waiting for that one to come in. Okay, so and it's a problem I run into in the industry all the time. That somebody will send you a photograph, and it's difficult to tell until you start grinding at that thing. So if I'm going down to fiberglass, then I would use my my vinyl ester putty to fill that. If you're going to use the thickened gel coat, it's going to be in the gel coat. If it's going into the fiberglass, the chips down to the fiberglass, you want to open that. It's probably taken a good impact. And sorry, I've got a light behind me there. I didn't see that. There we go. I'm in the light. So I would probably say if you're doing gel coat, I want to say my little fingernail size is, so they're smaller chips, probably 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch, not down to the fiberglass. I'd probably use a gel coat, thickened gel coat. But any bigger than that, then I would start using a filler. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that, I mean.
Okay, so second question comes in. So, and one I've struggled with as well. You're doing repair and you put in, fiberglass and putty, and you build back up, and now you're very close to the original surface of the gel coat layer. So when you go to gel coat it, you don't have enough sort of space left to get a thick gel coat layer on, and your repair shows through. So comment on how you could avoid that, so that you get that sort of thick white finish of gel coat at the end.
Sorry, Rich, you broke up in the beginning there. Just quickly repeat that. You're struggling to get a build of gel coat on your repair.
Right. So the question here is, when you fill with glass, how do you avoid having an edge of glass mat close to the finish, the gel coat finish?
I'm not sure exactly. I understand exactly what so if you're doing a fiberglass repair, and you've got it fed and down to perfection, you got the right shape, everything's good, and you're looking to go gel coat now. If the fiberglass ends outside of that gel coat, I'm looking to go at least 4 inches my masking outside of that repair. So I can really work at laying the gel coat up on my fiberglass area, so that all the overspray is going onto the existing gel coat. So that when I go to sand it out, I'm going to be going and sanding at the edge of the tape, and that's going to feather in nicely. And then all I got to do is remove the orange peel on the rest. So basically that's when, I would go further out than you think you need to, is usually my thinking. And usually I'm taping too close anyway, and there's no harm. You can always buff that area out. Even if you don't get close to gel coat in that area, at least in the area that you are gel coating, you can really work at laying on the gel coat. And we can talk, that's a whole nother thing about what guns to use and how to apply that and how thin to make the gel coat. You don't want it too thin, otherwise you're not able to get enough body on. And the tip size needs to be, I mean, if you can do a 2.0 tip size on a gun, that's really nice. Then you're able to lay a lot of gel coat on there. If you can go bigger, that's better, but then you're not going to get a nice finish. You're going to have more orange peel, and you're going to have a little more to stand out. So that's something we can talk about too.
Okay. All right, that's good amount of content. We covered a lot of ground tonight. It's been about an hour. It might be a good time to stop for this episode unless there's any other questions pending. And I think it might be a nice segue to a second episode then, to focus on gel coating and finishing. You agree with that, Mark?
It'd be really nice to have some feedback and see whether we've answered some of the questions too, because I mean it can be a pretty broad field. You know, there's a lot of variables in it as far as what kind of repair you're doing. I mean, we had some really interesting ones of a Hobie 18 hull that had been impacted, you know, and how to access that, and the structural damage, you know, whether it is structural, you know, how to repair the boot of a stanchion post, you know, there's some easy methods there. Yeah, it'd be nice to get some feedback and see whether you guys actually got a little bit of input and enjoyed what we had to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the invitation has my contact information in it. Also on the Hobie Class website at hobieclass.com, there's a contact us page on there. So we would certainly welcome your feedback and comments on how we did tonight. All right, very good. Well, thanks for Mark for joining in. Thanks for all of you for participating here. Hope to do more of these, so stay tuned to social media and the class website, and we'll announce the date and topics as they come up. All right.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Richie.
All right, thank you.
Yes.